Greetings, dear colleagues. It is our pleasure to present the IEP UNESCO research at the 2020 European Quality Assurance Forum. My name is Michaela. I'm a program specialist, and together with Uliana Furiv, the Associate Project Officer at IEP UNESCO, we would like to share the findings from the international survey supporting flexible learning pathways in higher education through national qualification framework and quality assurance. What is the context behind our research? Today, great inequalities and inequities persist in higher education and have been even more exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. Many higher education systems found themselves poorly prepared and unable to mitigate the consequences of the pandemic, which in many contexts has led to a total shutdown of higher education institutions or even whole systems. The pandemic also forced a number of higher education institutions to cancel or postpone examinations, which affected the enrollments of students for the next academic year. Increasing evidence suggests that higher education institutions that have been offering alternative and flexible approaches in delivery of education and admissions were better equipped to respond to the current crisis. The ongoing crisis once again highlighted the need for flexible higher education systems to provide diverse learning pathways in support of equity and lifelong learning, in line with efforts launched under the Education 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goal 4 of the United Nations. What are flexible learning pathways, or FLPs, and why are they important? The definition of FLPs is in fact quite complex and comprises diverse policies and practices across countries. UNESCO defines FLPs as entry and re-entry points at all ages and all educational levels, with links to validation and accreditation of the knowledge, skills, and competences acquired through formal, non-formal, and informal education. Flexible learning pathways in the context of our research refer to learning pathways that lead to a qualification, pathways for getting into higher education, so access, pathways for getting through higher education, progression and transferability, and pathways for getting out of higher education, completion. When investigating how students enter and progress through the system, our research has focused on the role of regulatory and policy frameworks, alternative admission pathways, opportunities for transfer between and within institutions, and instruments that support flexible learning pathways, such as national qualifications frameworks, quality assurance, and credit transfer systems. Our research has also shown that there are many obstacles to the establishment of flexible learning pathways in higher education. First, there can be weak policy environments for FLP. There may be formal arrangements for flexible learning pathways, but limited experience of it in practice. In addition, higher education systems often do not have guidelines that can support institutions to develop flexible learning pathways. There may be also administrative fragmentation that leads to uncoordinated higher education systems. Many countries have fragmented national governance structures where various ministries and buffer organizations are in charge of different parts of higher education systems. And institutional autonomy can limit the capacity of the state to steer change. In highly decentralized systems, initiatives to develop flexible learning pathways can take place within and between institutions, giving them the power to choose which institutions they want to collaborate with and which one to avoid. And competition between higher education institutions in market-based systems discourages collaboration. Over the years, many countries have introduced performance-based funding, research excellence initiatives, and ranking systems. This has greatly influenced the willingness of higher education institutions to collaborate with each other. And articulations are also strongly influenced by differences in institutional structures and education and training profiles. Such differences are also reflected in institutions' missions and visions, curriculum, pedagogical approaches, and assessment. Specificities of institutional culture, hierarchies of prestige, and lack of trust inhibit the establishment of flexible learning pathways between institutions. And finally, information and guidance may be missing or ineffective. This can have consequences for students who may be obliged to enroll in fields of study that do not match their interests, aspirations, or professional goals. What is the overall goal of our research? It is to produce knowledge and provide evidence-based policy advice to higher education authorities who are considering building or strengthening flexible learning pathways as an area of future reform. With this objective in mind, IAP's research focuses on 4 questions. What are the policies, regulatory frameworks, instruments, and practices that support flexible learning pathways in higher education? How effective are they to support flexible learning pathways and building closer linkages between and within higher education levels and institutions? How does the establishment of flexible learning pathways influence the access, progression, transfer, and completion of those identified as disadvantaged groups in the case countries? What lessons can be learned from the experiences of case countries regarding the key enablers and factors lacking in the implementation of flexible learning pathways in higher education? Our research includes a stock-taking exercise of good practices in the field, an international survey, and 8 in-depth case countries at different stages of developing flexibility, comprising Chile in Latin America, Finland and the United Kingdom in Europe, India and Malaysia in Asia, and South Africa and Morocco on the African continent. Here are some of our publications already available in open access online. The links to the publications will be provided in the list of references at the end of the presentation. And now I pass it on to Uliana.
Thank you. Today we will share the results of our survey. So why did we decide to conduct a survey on flexible learning pathways? As we learned through our stock-taking exercise, literature on FLPs is quite scarce and policies and practices are poorly documented. So in January 2019, we decided to conduct a survey for ministries of higher education in order to identify these existing policies and practices in support of FLPs. The international survey covered questions on the availability of the following elements: alternative admissions pathways, the role of national qualification frameworks, quality assurance, which support flexible learning pathways. And in this presentation, we will specifically highlight how NQFs and QA can support flexible learning pathways. So the survey gathered a total of 75 exploitable country responses. A total of 23 responses were from Africa, 21 from Europe, 13 from Asia and the Pacific, 12 from Latin America and the Caribbean, and 6 from the Arab states. You can see in the figure how the responded numbers compared to the numbers of countries in the regions. So most of the regions were well represented. And absolute numbers instead of percentages have been used in the data analysis. We considered this as more appropriate as the units of analysis are higher education systems rather than institutions. So in our survey, we aim to study what instruments support entry pathways to higher education. And the findings indicated that while in the majority of the surveyed countries, policies existed to support recognition of prior learning, RPL practices based on non-formal and informal learning were less common. These are marked in brown and orange. In Europe, for example, only 8 out of 21 surveyed countries had entry pathways to short cycle degree programs based on informal learning, and only 5 out of 21 countries had access to bachelor-level programs based on informal learning. So as you can see, RPL practices were more commonly used to access short cycle programs at ISCIT level 5, rather than bachelor-level programs at ISCIT level 6. However, in the context of COVID-19, when higher education institutions consider alternative and flexible approaches to admissions, recognition of prior learning, or RPL, and national qualifications frameworks can really enable alternative routes of admission to higher education. Through RPL, learners can have their competencies acknowledged more easily, regardless of the context, formal, informal, or non-formal. In tandem, NQFs can help facilitate RPL procedures during admissions by demonstrating comparisons among the learning outcomes of different programs, sectors, and contexts. NQFs focus usually on learning outcomes and learning pathways toward a qualification, and describe linkages between qualifications in a given education system. So by demonstrating comparability between qualifications, NQFs can really facilitate FLPs in higher education. However, many countries still do not have a comprehensive qualifications framework that cover all types of provision at all levels. Some tend to have separate qualification frameworks and credit transfer systems for academic and vocational education, which restricts permeability in the system. So countries that responded to the survey were asked to indicate the types of education that are recognized in their NQFs. And overall, we found out that in most of the surveyed countries, there is an NQF that includes higher education and vocational education and general basic education. However, NQFs that recognize integration of adult education, non-formal and informal learning are not so widespread. Quality assurance and accreditation are other instruments that can both facilitate and inhibit flexible learning pathways in higher education. Over the past 30 years, quality assurance systems have been established in many countries as a global higher education reform. Among the surveyed countries, quality assurance is also a rather common practice. 65 countries conduct quality assurance at the program level, and 63 do so at the institutional level. Most countries also use a combination of program and institutional quality assurance procedure. And in Europe, the majority of the surveyed countries provide both program and institutional quality assurance. A standard-based approach to quality assurance reduces disparities in the content of study programs and their quality across institutions and programs, which can in turn facilitate the recognition of prior learning and transfer of students. Quality assurance can facilitate FLPs through an alignment between programs, standards, and NQF program and level descriptors, and therefore facilitate both horizontal and vertical student transfers. Finally, quality assurance can support FLPs by recognizing the value of non-formal and informal learning and encourage its use in access and progression in higher education. But our research at the country level has also shown that quality assurance systems can also be quite conservative and prohibit innovative educational approaches and new delivery modes. The survey collected data on the alignment of NQF level descriptors and program quality assurance standards, as well as that of NQF program descriptors and program QA standards. And findings from our research indicate that in 45 countries, program QA, focusing on learning outcomes, is a prerequisite for accreditation or registration of a program on the NQF. In 47 countries, NQF level descriptors and program quality assurance standards are aligned, and in another 44 countries, NQF program descriptors and program QA standards are also aligned. So I will now pass to Michaela Martin on the lessons learned from our survey.
Okay, thank you so much, Uliana. So what are the lessons that we can take from the survey that can be useful in the context of the current pandemic? First, the importance of developing FLPs in the higher education system is growing, and the provision is becoming more flexible. However, the quality and validation remains an issue and needs to be prioritized in the QA community. Recognition of prior learning based on non-formal and informal learning is still less common and more often used to access short cycle rather than bachelor level, so academic programs. And COVID-19 has shown the need for alternative and flexible admission approaches. NQF and QA can enable this flexibility. Ensuring coherence between study programs and qualifications is important as it reinforces a level of trust, transparency, and credibility in the quality of the education provision and the resulting qualifications. Having a framework whereby QA standards and NQF descriptors are aligned can in turn facilitate the portability of credits and recognition of prior learning in formal, non-formal, and informal settings, enabling students to move more flexibly through the higher education system. It was our pleasure to share our research findings. If you would like to learn more about the IAP research on FLP, we invite you to visit our website where you can find our publications. Thank you for your time and your attention. And looking forward to meeting you soon at the conference online. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.